And major stimulus to the hobby from a variety of standpoints. First of all, I'd like to introduce Brian Henderson, and then he's going to introduce Marlon Spots. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk to Brian a little bit. He's going to give you an introduction on what he does, what he's all about, and we're going to talk a little bit about the science called vehicle identification numbers. And it truly is a science if you're into car restoration. I mean, it's one of the most nerve-wracking things when you buy a car and you try to figure out if the numbers match or not. And I think Brian will be able to talk a little bit about his experience, and then, of course, from the Yanko Deuce Nova perspective as well with Marlon. Brian?
Thanks, Bill. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to Salt Lift Showroom 7. This is obviously our 7th year here. It's an idea that I came up with 8 years ago. This building sat idle for GM Carlisle, and I thought this was a beautiful setting for some really high-performance Camaros, Novas, Chevelles, whatever. So I talked to Carlisle, and they pretty much thought I was crazy, but they said, go ahead and see what you can do with it. So this is our 7th year, so I guess crazy in a good way. But today, Phil wants to talk a little bit about VINs, vehicle identification numbers. One of the things in the hobby that a lot of people ask, a lot of people come up and ask you is your car all numbers matching? You know, is it all numbers matching? Then I'll say to them most of the time, well, what do you mean by all numbers match? What do you consider all numbers matching? Because there's a lot of numbers on a car that mean a lot of different things. And ultimately, most people don't even know what it means. The generic term, it's numbers matching. You know, truly, what does it mean? But if you're talking about the VIN derivative, as Phil would call it, that's the number that is assigned to your vehicle. And to prevent, for warranty purposes, theft purposes, and things like that, they number these cars. There's, on a Camaro, for instance, your VIN is attached to your dash with 2 special rivets called rosette rivets. All right, that's what GM used. So once that VIN is in there and the car is assigned, there's also hidden VINs. And in the case of a Camaro and a Nova, they are hidden underneath the heater box. One of them are, and that's on the firewall, and the other one is on top of the cowl. So those are 3 VIN numbers right there on the body itself. The only other 2 VIN numbers on these cars are one that is placed on the engine itself and one that's placed on the transmission itself. Now those are placed on there by a line worker, and they are stamped with a hammer, just like you would expect. And the transmission is stamped at basically the same time as the engine. So the font, the look of the VIN should be somewhat consistent. There is some variations because when you hit a piece of aluminum versus a piece of cast iron, it looks a little bit different. In the case of the Camaros, especially the high-performance ones that we deal with all the time, especially the 427 cars and 396 cars, those VINs are placed primarily by the oil filter down on the rail of the block. And it's a very rough cast area, and even sometimes with the engine on a stand, and right there, they're very hard to look at. Even in the case of like an Indy Pace car over here, we had a customer with his Indy Pace car at the shop. He was selling the car. We had the car on the rack. We removed linkages, everything else. Lit this thing up like you won't believe. Had to get all kind of cameras up there. It was so hard to read. Finally, we got a good picture of it, but it was just very, very faintly hit. In other cases, they're very well hit. In some cases, they're deeper on one side than they are the other. It's just the way the angle of the hit was. So, but they are meaningful. But that's what, when people say, what's numbers matching? That's, I think, what most people expect. But there are so many other numbers on your car, you know, from the carburetors, starters, water pumps, your sheet metal. Even carpeting has paper tags underneath if you really want to go crazy about numbers. But most people would expect the idea of numbers matching is the VIN on the block match the transmission to the car. So that, GM sort of did us a favor by moving the VIN down to the side of the oil filter. When they are at the pad, a lot of people, back when, the race car guys, you know, when you deck a motor to get more compression, whatever you need to do to it, that was the first area that gets wiped off the pad. So a lot of times the pad's wiped clean, your VIN's on the pad, and your application code for the engine's on there too, so it's wiped clean. And that's an example I used of that like yesterday during the same talk was the green Yanko over here in the far corner.
Camaro.
Supercar Workshop restored that car, and the owner of that car had the engine and did not have the car. He's a collector of Yanko cars, and anything Yanko the guy pretty much grabs. He had the engine for that car, but the engine had been decked, so that the actual application code had been lost, but the VIN for the car was still at the side of the oil filter, which indicated that we found that car in New York some years later, and were able to marry the two back together. So that's a good, that's a good thing that GM put the VIN on the side of the block, because that was actually able to have the original motor back into the original car. So that's what I consider numbers match. Okay, so if you look at it, the big picture, 3 on the body, 2 on the driveline, and that's really it for your VIN. Marlon, you want to add some things to this? This is my friend Marlon Spots. Marlon runs the Yanko Deuce Registry. He's responsible for the cars here, and he knows more about these than anybody. So here's Marlon's take.
So my focus is just the 70 Yanko Deuce Novas, where Brian looks at just about every high-performance car out there. And what we find on just a limited run of 175 cars built in 3 consecutive weeks is very consistent locations. There's always the VINs on the firewall. For the Novas, there are actually 2 behind the heater box, where the Camaro has 1. And for these Novas, the VIN is always stamped on the pad behind the alternator. They're never down by the oil filter. We do see a lot of variability, however, in these 3 consecutive weeks, where we'll see double hits, miss hits, individual hand stamped VINs, locations moving around. So there was variability from when it was applied by the line workers, but just within those 3 consecutive weeks of cars. Of the 175 Deuces that were produced, we know there's 90 of them left, and even within just those 90, we see a lot of variability. So it is a good thing to have the VIN numbers on the block and on the trans. But like Brian said, with our VINs up on the pad, a lot of times they will get removed when somebody decks the block. There's some guys that will actually put some acid on there and try to raise them up, because when it gets stamped, it compresses the metal. With limited success, I've only had a couple guys actually be able to lift the VIN up out of a deck block. So but that's the perspective of just those 3 weeks of cars.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's extraordinary to have both of you here. This level of intellectual intelligence here with a hobby is just simply unmatched, right? During the studies for the book Echoes of Norwood, I managed to make the acquaintance of and the friendship with the line workers that actually built the cars. Behind me are a couple of men who were on the assembly line, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, just like them, that are looking to transition into history what should be saved from what is now the living past. The living past is on display here. These men are alive, and they can tell you about the past. History is something that occurs when there's no one left to tell you what happened. You have to rely on what is written, what is recorded, what has been saved. And I have been successful in gathering historical artifacts from the assembly process as an outcome of writing the book. We have the original Fisher body sketch for the sign for the Fisher body building sign over there by the table that's on display. That's an item from 1937. And today we're going to unveil something that's exceptionally special for the numbers matching crowd. Those of you that have wondered about, is my car original? Was the VIN on the engine? The one that was assigned to my car originally, is that the motor it was born with? Well, today we're going to unveil, Ryan, if you want to pick this up, we're going to unveil the actual tooling that was used to stamp the ZL1s, the Copos, the DZ302s, the 350s, the 327s. Everything that began in 1967 and moved forward with the beginning of the Motor Vehicle Identification Process Act, where VINs were required on blocks that were especially susceptible to theft, and thus you needed to identify that item. That exists today and was saved by workers. What we have here is we have the actual physical gang stamper that was used to stamp the blocks at Norwood Assembly. This would have been both Chevrolet Camaros, Pontiac Firebirds, Novas, and for a limited period of time, Buick Apollos in 1973. When there was a mistake made and this stamper was not used properly and it was caught by the plant production process, quality assurance, they would go back and they would make an effort to stamp the block in a post-production mode. This was typically done outside in what they called the ready to check lot or the hold lot. It may have even made its way into the OK lot before they found the problem. But then they would go out, they would simply move the alternator aside that exposed the deck on the side of the head on the one side of the block, and they would use the repair stamper. The repair stamper is a long bar, along with a set of gang stamps that would be taped together in the right sequence, that would then be placed on the ledge in the proper location, and then the strike would occur with a large hammer on that bar, thus imprinting the vehicle identification number as it would have properly existed in a production mode. And it's just been put on the block, once again, for identification purposes. Where mistakes were made on the line, there was an obliteration stamper used, and that is the X stamper that's shown right here. You can see an example on this picture of X marks where the VIN was actually attempted to be stamped 3 times, and on the 3rd time they got it right. The X stamper was used to obliterate VINs that were improperly struck. Maybe they weren't stamped right, and it was used to remove that so one clear consecutive VIN could be read and will memorialize the fact that the item was original to the car. Finally, we were able to recover the stamps, the physical hand stamps that were used specifically on the ZL stamped, not necessarily in a gang stamper. There's an example of the VIN's hand stamp there as you see as it goes around. Those stamps that you see on display exactly match the size and font that were used on the ZL1s, and they were saved. Now, the stamps themselves were marked with a horizontal line, which indicates the right orientation to the person that's actually doing the stamping, and it allows for the guy to get it right side up and not upside down. That's important because you don't want to put a perfect stamping on there and have it upside down or otherwise improperly oriented. That would be a problem from a quality control standpoint. So there you have it. We've kind of come full circle now. The hobby recognizes what numbers matching means and places. Now we have an artifact from production that actually saves the actual tooling used to make those marks. So it's truly a historic find. I have to give all the thanks and all the congratulations to the men of Norwood. Can we have a round of applause for these men, ladies and gentlemen? Gail, I'd like to personally thank you for coming today and being part of this. Pete, I'd like to personally thank you today for being part of this. I'd like to thank you for helping build some of the finest cars ever made in the United States of America, made in Ohio at the Norwood plant. And we appreciate everything that you did for us as a hobby by making these cars and everything that you did on the lines.
Thank you, and thank you all for buying Camaros, Firebirds. Thank you all.
Yeah, we just mentioned that it's nice to have a crowd this large. When we were building, we never thought about anything like this. So we're proud to be able to see you here, and we were proud of our product.
Are there any questions from those of you assembled? Anything that you want to ask, open mic right now? Anything about your cars? You want to share anything about your automobiles, your passion for the Camaro? How about you? Tell us something about your car.
Oh, no. No, I've got a 5th gen. It's 2010. A lot of mods, just love it.
Did the Camaro Heritage encourage you to buy a 5th gen? The old Heritage?
Yeah, mine is 70.
That's
70, yeah.
72. 72 was a bad year, a strike. And some cars that were crushed. What was it like to crush those cars in 72, Gail, after that strike?
It was heartbreaking to see all them cars being crushed. It was, I couldn't tell you the number of them. In the book, it will show you a whole bunch of cars being crushed. But they had a stockpile, so they sold a lot of them too. But they could not keep up like the following years.
Yeah, there were 1,100 cars crushed, and they couldn't meet the side impact beams that they couldn't retrofit the doors and the quarter panels with the side impact beams that were required for 73. So the cars were more economical just to turn into scrap metal. So they stripped them down as much as they could, and they crushed them. You know, Norwood's noted for that. You know, it's the only plant in the country where they crushed almost an entire couple of day inventory of production simply to meet a regulation. You know, Norwood's also notable for having the only cars that were ever sold to a dealer and then returned back to a factory. And we find that at the ZL1 program, when Fred Gibb received his cars out in La Harpe, and he thought they were going to be priced like an iron block Copo, and it turned out that when he got them, he got a whole bunch of sticker shock. Brian, what kind of sticker shock set in when he got those cars off the transporter, and what was the delta on the cost difference?
Well, a Copo Camaro, if ordered, let's say, efficiently lean, would probably set you back right around $4,000. A Camaro, a Yenko Camaro, again, lean, $4,000, $4,100, optioned up a little bit, about $4,300. There's other examples of Copos out there. We've done Rally Sport Copos with a lot of options, M22s, all kind of things. Those cars get up there, but the ZL1s all came in at well over $7,000. So in 1969 money, you know, a $25 option was a big deal. So you think $7,000 for that same Camaro,
More
and the first 50 gift cars were basic, I mean, strip out Camaros. No radios, no fancy wheels, no spoilers. The automatic cars were column shift. I mean, they really were a basic race car. That's what Gibb wanted, but he did not expect the cost of development to be passed along to him as well. So they're a very hard car to sell. So that's a lot of those cars were broken up as far as engines were pulled, you know, sold to racers. Other engines were installed in the cars, but Phil's right. A lot of those cars, he just couldn't handle it. La Harpe is probably, well, it's smaller than Carlisle. I mean, it's a tiny little town. I've been there a number of times. I've been to the dealership. It's not much bigger than the diner across the street. It's not really any bigger than where we're standing. So can you imagine 50 of these Camaros rolling into Gibb Chevrolet at 7,000 plus? And it was a hard sell in the middle of a, you know, like Cornfield County is what it is. It's all fields and things like that. So, but he had a great success in 1968 with the Fred Gibb Novas. He ordered 50 Novas, the first Nova sub-lifter car with automatic transmission. And that's an example over there. That's one of the 50 Gibb Novas on the stand over there. So that was the first ever sub-lifter automatic, which became a regular production option in 1969. But it wasn't for people like Fred Gibb and Don Yanko. I mean, these cars wouldn't exist. That's the fact. I don't know that anybody else carried the torch more than those two gentlemen. So, but that's a little bit about the ZL1s. I mean, a very expensive car. So,
let's grab an owner perspective. Mark Hassett, could you come up here real quick? Mark owns ZL1 number 35. It was a Gibb car. Was returned to Norwood and then resold out to Sutliff Chevrolet in Pennsylvania here, Harrisburg, I believe. Yep. Isn't that about it?
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Bruce Larson and his connection to Sutliff and your green ZL1?
Well, these ZL1s, get up close. When the ZL1s were sitting at dealers, of course, they were so expensive they didn't sell. Some dealers, like my case, the dealer actually took the engine out, and Bruce Larson ended up with my engine, and then another engine was put in. But when Rusty Sims bought my car, he was the second owner. He found another engine to put in the car. But a lot of these cars, the engines were taken out. Some dealers added like a spoiler, rally wheels to try to sell them. My car actually didn't get sold new until September of 71. The 72s were actually out. So that's how long it took to sell.
So 1970.
Thank you, Mark. It's an extraordinary car, and I want to give Brian Henderson credit for pointing out that the car was still for sale. You know, Mark had me hunting for a ZL1, and I called Brian and I said, hey, you know where one's at? And he goes, yeah, there's this one sitting out in the cornfield out in Winchester, Indiana. You probably want to go check that out. The guy's an aluminum front end Impala guy, but you know, he might do business with you. And we got the car. We got the car. Truly historic things. It's Americana, it's our life, it's our history, it's our heritage, and it's the automotive treasure that we're celebrating here today at the Carlisle GM Nationals. I know it's a wet day, but you know what? We got a lot of sunshine in this room right now. I see a lot of good-looking faces in here, and we got a lot of good-looking cars. So let's party like there's no tomorrow today, and let's look at these cars and let's have some fun and some camaraderie. Come up and see these Norwood guys asking questions. Come up and see the artifact. It's on display. Don't forget, the National Automotive Heritage will be here to provide the award for Camaro #1 at 3 o'clock. So don't miss that. That's really important, and that's a great honor for Camaro #1. There's 12 shirts left here, too, for Solid Lifter Showroom. Don't forget that.
This is Pam from NortheastWheelsEvents.com at the 2015 GM Nationals.